Miller invited me to join in the sport, and to that end presented me with one of the hectograph copies on which to exercise my wits, together with a photograph of the document. "And shall you?" I asked. "Not I," he replied, laughing. "In the first place, I have not been formally consulted, and consequently am a passive though interested spectator. In the second place, I have a theory of my own which I shall test if the occasion arises. But if you would like to take part in the competition, I am authorized to show you the photograph and the translation. I will pass them on to you, and I wish you joy of them." He handed me the photograph and a sheet of paper that he had just taken from his pocketbook, and watched me with grim amusement as I read out the first few lines. "Woe, city, lies, robbery, prey, noise, whip, rattling, wheel, horse, chariot, day, darkness, gloominess, clouds, darkness, morning, mountain, people, strong, fire, them, flame." "It doesn't look very promising at first sight," I remarked. "What is the professor's theory?" "His theory, provisionally of course, is that the words form the message, and the groups of letters represent mere filled-up spaces between the words." "But surely," I protested, "that would be a very transparent device." Thorndyke laughed. "There is a childlike simplicity about it," said he, "that is highly attractive, but discouraging. It is much more probable that the words are dummies, and that the letters contain the message. Or again, the solution may lie in an entirely different direction. But listen, is that a cab coming here?" It was. It drew up opposite our chambers, and a few moments later a brisk step ascending the stairs heralded a smart rat-tat at our door. Flinging open the latter, I found myself confronted by a well-dressed stranger, who, after a quick glance at me, peered inquisitively over my shoulder into the room. "I am relieved, Dr. Jervis," said he, "to find you and Dr. Thorndyke at home, as I have come on somewhat urgent professional business. My name," he continued, entering in response to my invitation, "is Barton, but you don't know me, though I know you both by sight. I have come to ask you if one of you, or better still, both, could come tonight and see my brother." "That," said Thorndyke, "depends on the circumstances and on the whereabouts of your brother." "The circumstances," said Mr. Barton, "are, in my opinion, highly suspicious, and I will place them before you, of course in strict confidence." Thorndyke nodded and indicated a chair. "My brother," continued Mr. Barton, taking the proffered seat, "has recently married for the second time. His age is 55, and that of his wife 26, and I may say that the marriage has been, well, by no means a success. Now, within the last fortnight, my brother has been attacked by a mysterious and extremely painful affection of the stomach, to which his doctor seems unable to give a name. It has resisted all treatment hitherto. Day by day the pain and distress increase, and I feel that, unless something decisive is done, the end cannot be far off." "Is the pain worse after taking food?" inquired Thorndyke. "That's just it," exclaimed our visitor. "I see what is in your mind, and it has been in mine too, so much so that I have tried repeatedly to obtain samples of the food that he is taking, and this morning I succeeded." Here he took from his pocket a wide-mouthed bottle, which, disengaging from its paper wrappings, he laid on the table. "When I called, he was taking his breakfast of arrowroot, which he complained had a gritty taste, supposed by his wife to be due to the sugar. Now I had provided myself with this bottle, and during the absence of his wife I managed unobserved to convey a portion of the arrowroot that he had left into it, and I should be greatly obliged if you would examine it and tell me if this arrowroot contains anything that it should not." He pushed the bottle across to Thorndyke, who carried it to the window, and extracting a small quantity of the contents with a glass rod, examined the pasty mass with the aid of a lens, then, lifting the bell glass cover from the microscope, which stood on its table by the window, he smeared a small quantity of the suspected matter onto a glass slip and placed it on the stage of the instrument. "I observe a number of crystalline particles in this," he said after a brief inspection, "which have the appearance of arsenious acid." "Ah!" ejaculated Mr. Barton, "just as I feared. But are you certain?" "No," replied Thorndyke, "but the matter is easily tested." He pressed the button of the bell that communicated with the laboratory, a summons that brought the laboratory assistants from his lair with characteristic promptitude. "Will you please prepare a Marsh's apparatus, Polton?" said Thorndyke. "I have a couple ready, sir," replied Polton. "Then pour the acid into one and bring it to me with a tile." As his familiar vanished silently, Thorndyke turned to Mr. Barton. "Supposing we find arsenic in this arrowroot, as we probably shall, what do you want us to do?" "I want you to come and see my brother," replied our client. "Why not take a note from me to his doctor?" "No, no, I want you to come. I should like you both to come, and put a stop at once to this dreadful business. Consider, it is a matter of life and death. You won't refuse. I beg you not to refuse me your help in these terrible circumstances." "Well," said Thorndyke as his assistant reappeared, "let us first see what the test has to tell us." Polton advanced to the table, on which he deposited a small flask, the contents of which were in a state of brisk effervescence, a bottle labelled calcium hypochlorite, and a white porcelain tile. The flask was fitted with a safety funnel and a glass tube drawn out to a fine jet, to which Polton cautiously applied a lighted match. Instantly there sprang from the jet a tiny, pale violet flame. Thorndyke now took the tile and held it in the flame for several seconds, when the appearance of the surface remained unchanged, save for the small circle of condensed moisture. His next proceeding was to thin the arrowroot with distilled water until it was quite fluid, and then pour a small quantity into the funnel. It ran slowly down the tube into the flask, with the bubbling contents of which it became speedily mixed. Almost immediately a change began to appear in the character of the flame, which from a pale violet turned gradually to a sickly blue, while above it hung a faint cloud of white smoke. Once more Thorndyke held the tile above the jet, but this time no sooner had the pallid flame touched the cold surface of the porcelain than there appeared on the latter a glistening black stain. "That is pretty conclusive," observed Thorndyke, lifting the stopper out of the reagent bottle. "But we will apply the final test." He dropped a few drops of the hypochlorite solution onto the tile, and immediately the black stain faded away and vanished. "We can now answer your question, Mr. Barton," said he, replacing the stopper as he turned to our client. "The specimen that you brought us certainly contains arsenic, and in very considerable quantities." "Then," exclaimed Mr. Barton, starting from his chair, "you will come and help me to rescue my brother from this dreadful peril. Don't refuse me, Dr. Thorndyke, for mercy's sake, don't refuse." Thorndyke reflected for a moment. "Before we decide," said he, "we must see what engagements we have." With a quick, significant glance at me, he walked into the office, whither I followed in some bewilderment, for I knew that we had no engagements for the evening. "Now, Jervis," said Thorndyke as he closed the office door, "what are we to do?" "We must go, I suppose," I replied. "It seems a pretty urgent case." "It does," he agreed. "Of course, the man may be telling the truth, after all." "You don't think he is, then?" "No. It is a plausible tale, but there is too much arsenic in that arrowroot. Still, I think I ought to go. It is an ordinary professional risk, but there is no reason why you should put your head into the noose." "Thank you," I said somewhat huffily. "I don't see what risk there is, but if any exists, I claim the right to share it." "Very well," he answered with a smile. "We will both go. I think we can take care of ourselves." He re-entered the sitting room and announced his decision to Mr. Barton, whose relief and gratitude were quite pathetic. "But," said Thorndyke, "you have not yet told us where your brother lives." "Rexford," was the reply. "Rexford in Essex. It is an out-of-the-way place, but if we catch the 7:15 from Liverpool Street, we shall be there in an hour and a half." "And as to the return, you know the trains, I suppose?" "Oh, yes," replied our client. "I will see that you don't miss your train back." "Then I will be with you in a minute," said Thorndyke, and taking the still bubbling flask, he retired to the laboratory, whence he returned in a few minutes carrying his hat and overcoat. The cab which had brought our client was still waiting, and we were soon rattling through the streets toward the station, where we arrived in time to furnish ourselves with dinner baskets and select our compartment at leisure. During the early part of the journey our companion was in excellent spirits. He dispatched the cold fowl from the basket and quaffed the rather indifferent claret with as much relish as if he had not had a single relation in the world, and after dinner he became genial to the verge of hilarity. But as the time went on, there crept into his manner a certain anxious restlessness. He became silent and preoccupied, and several times furtively consulted his watch. "The train is confoundedly late," he exclaimed irritably. 7 minutes behind time already." "A few minutes more or less are not of much consequence," said Thorndyke. "No, of course not, but still. Ah, thank heaven, here we are." He thrust his head out of the off-side window and gazed eagerly down the line. Then, leaping to his feet, he bustled out onto the platform while the train was still moving. Even as we alighted, a warning bell rang furiously on the up platform, and as Mr. Barton hurried us through the empty booking office to the outside of the station, the rumble of the approaching train could be heard above the noise made by our own train moving off. "My carriage does not seem to have arrived yet," exclaimed Mr. Barton, looking anxiously up the station approach. "If you will wait here a moment, I will go and make inquiries." He darted back into the booking office and through it onto the platform, just as the up train roared into the station. Thorndyke followed him with quick but stealthy steps, and peering out of the booking office door, watched his proceedings. Then he turned and beckoned to me. "There he goes," said he. pointing to an iron footbridge that spanned the line, and as I looked I saw, clearly defined against the dim night sky, a flying figure racing toward the up side. It was hardly 2/3 across when the guard's whistle sang out its shrill warning. "Quick, Jervis!" exclaimed Thorndyke. "She's off!" He leaped down onto the line, whither I followed instantly, and crossing the rails we clambered up together onto the footboard opposite an empty first-class compartment. Thorndyke's magazine knife, containing, among other implements, a railway key, was already in his hand. The door was speedily unlocked, and as we entered, Thorndyke ran through and looked out onto the platform. "Just in time!" he exclaimed. "He is in one of the forward compartments." He relocked the door, and seating himself, proceeded to fill his pipe. "And now," said I, as the train moved out of the station, "perhaps you will explain this little comedy." "With pleasure," he replied, "if it needs any explanation. But you can hardly have forgotten Mr. James's flattering remarks in his report of the Greek Street incident, clearly giving the impression that the mysterious document was in my possession. When I read that, I knew I must look out for some attempt to recover it, though I hardly expected such promptness. Still, when Mr. Barton called without credentials or appointment, I viewed him with some suspicion. That suspicion deepened when he wanted us both to come. It deepened further when I found an impossible quantity of arsenic in his sample, and it gave place to certainty when, having allowed him to select the trains by which we were to travel, I went up to the laboratory and examined the timetable, for I then found that the last train for London left Rexford 10 minutes after we were due to arrive. Obviously, this was a plan to get us both safely out of the way while he and some of his friends ransacked our chambers for the missing document. "I see, and that accounts for his extraordinary anxiety at the lateness of the train. But why did you come, if you knew it was a plant?" "My dear fellow," said Thorndyke, "I never miss an interesting experience if I can help it. There are possibilities in this, too, don't you see?" "But supposing his friends have broken into our chambers already?" "That contingency has been provided for, but I think they will wait for Mr. Barton and us." Our train, being the last one up, stopped at every station, and crawled slothfully in the intervals, so that it was past 11 o'clock when we reached Liverpool Street. Here we got out cautiously, and mingling with the crowd, followed the unconscious Barton up the platform, through the barrier, and out into the street. He seemed in no special hurry, for after pausing to light a cigar, he set off at an easy pace up New Broad Street. Thorndyke hailed a hansom, and motioning me to enter, directed the cabman to drive to Clifford's Inn Passage. "Sit well back," said he, as we rattled away up New Broad Street. "We shall be passing our gay deceiver presently. In fact, there he is, a living, walking illustration of the folly of underrating the intelligence of one's adversary." At Clifford's Inn Passage we dismissed the cab, and retiring into the shadow of the dark, narrow alley, kept an eye on the gate of Inner Temple Lane. In about 20 minutes we observed our friend approaching on the south side of Fleet Street. He halted at the gate, plied the knocker, and after a brief parley with the night porter, vanished through the wicket. We waited yet 5 minutes more, and then, having given him time to get clear of the entrance, we crossed the road. The porter looked at us with some surprise. "There's a gentleman just gone down to your chambers, sir," said he. "He told me you were expecting him." "Quite right," said Thorndyke with a dry smile. "I was. Good night." We slunk down the lane, past the church, and through the gloomy cloisters, giving a wide berth to all lamps and lighted entries, until, emerging into paper buildings, we crossed at the darkest part to King's Bench Walk, where Thorndyke made straight for the chambers of our friend Anstey, which were 2 doors above our own. "Why are we coming here?" I asked as we ascended the stairs. But the question needed no answer when we reached the landing, for through the open door of our friend's chambers I could see in the darkened room Anstey himself with 2 uniformed constables and a couple of plainclothesmen. "There has been no signal yet, sir," said one of the latter, whom I recognized as a detective sergeant of our division. "No," said Thorndyke, "but the M.C. has arrived. He came in 5 minutes before us." "Then," exclaimed Anstey, "the ball will open shortly, ladies and gents. The boards are waxed, the fiddlers are tuning up, and—" "Not quite so loud, if you please, sir," said the sergeant. "I think there is somebody coming up Crown Office Row." The ball had, in fact, opened. As we peered cautiously out of the open window, keeping well back in the darkened room, a stealthy figure crept out of the shadow, crossed the road, and stole noiselessly into the entry of Thorndyke's chambers. It was quickly followed by a second figure, and then by a third, in which I recognized our elusive client. "Now, listen for the signal," said Thorndyke. "They won't waste time. Confound that clock!" The soft-voiced bell of the Inner Temple clock, mingling with the harsher tones of St. Dunstan's and the Law Courts, slowly tolled out the hour of midnight, and as the last reverberations were dying away, some metallic object, apparently a coin, dropped with a sharp clink onto the pavement under our window.